It was great meeting up with Stefan in Berlin over the August bank holiday weekend. Stefan and the family are doing missionary work in Brazil, where Stefan teaches in a theological seminary. But we were exploring Berlin and the miracle of the wall coming down. So many small things done by small people make all the difference. And Stefan spoke of the way in which he felt his work as a theological educator was all about sowing seeds and waiting for their multiplication.
Really looking forward to seeing you all in October. We are back in Europe. That's the scheme of our mission organization. So we'll be 4 years outside Europe, outside Germany, and then be back for half a year and catching up with friends again, trying to raise funds for our work and to relax a little and to be able to reflect on our work which we are doing in Brazil. We were conversing and talking about seeds and the idea of multiplication, really. So you, as a theological teacher, you don't tend to influence many people at one time. You invest in individuals, at most 20 people at a time, and but then seeing that as an investment in future churches and even in future generations, it's really like a dandelion where the wind comes and takes these, I don't know how many there are, maybe 200, 300 seeds on one little flower, and then the wind carries it away, and after the seed grows, there are many more dandelions, and there is it's a wonderful metaphor for the work we are doing in theological education. There was some words, really, all the same words. It was a saying, I don't know even by whom it is. It says something like, when many small people do many small things in many small places, we can change the face of the world. Yes, that's what we need very much, really, is your prayers, your interest, really, because having people who are interested in what you do is sort of the essential thing. And if we come from a different culture, working in a different cultural context, you sometimes get bogged down or discouraged, really, because what you're doing seems to be so insignificant. But then receiving a card or an email from someone like you, and just knowing about you yourself, about the church, is wonderful, because you feel there are connections, there are people who are following us and are concerned as well.
A highlight of my visit to Berlin was to go to the Church of Reconciliation and hand over a copy of my predecessor Eric Burton's book, No Walls Within, in which he had expounded his vision of a church for all ages, a church for all peoples, with no walls within. Before coming to Highbury, Eric had travelled the country as the Congregational Union's Youth and Children's Officer.
The Congregational Union of England and Wales really gave me a tremendous privilege of visiting church. The National Sunday School Union came and said, would I write a book on the growth of family church worship. There was Connie Parker and Bert Hamilton, along with Dick Hall. These three were the real pioneers of encouraging the churches to think very seriously about transferring the idea of Sunday school to family church. And when I was first appointed, would I continue to go around the churches to try and encourage this.
And when you arrived at Highbury then, it was an opportunity to put into practice the philosophy of the book almost.
There was the big question, right, I was going to give up the work of youth and children's work secretary for the denomination. Where was I to go? And I had a letter. Would I come down to Highbury for an informal meeting? We shall in the near future be looking for a new minister, But before we start doing anything very officially, we would like to have a quite off-the-record meeting with you. By we, I mean the present deacons of the church. When we went round the room, and one of the deacons who was at that meeting was Dick Adams. I think I'm right in saying he's the only one who was in that meeting, still in the church today. And there was one of the many deacons, one of the very lovable characters in Highbury, was a man called Fred Wright. Fred had been a master at the grammar school, science master at the grammar school, and he'd retired. And one of the questions which Fred asked me, and he asked it with great difficulty because he had cancer of the tongue. And he said, "Mr. Burton, if you come to this church, would you be prepared to experiment?" And I said, "What do you mean by experiment?" He said, "Well, it seems to me that you've got a number of ideas that you would like to put into action. Would you be prepared to experiment?" And there was a long pause while I sort of thought, well, what's to be my answer for this? And then he enlarged on his question and he said, "I think I ought to say, would you be prepared to experiment if we as deacons were prepared to recognize that sometimes your experiments might fail if we continue to support you in spite of failure?" And I drove back to London that night on a glorious summer evening. I thought, good gracious, here's a church that's really sort of has sufficient vision to want to prepare. And that was what impressed me. It all followed afterwards that they gave me an invitation, and I thought, yes, well, a church that's prepared to have that kind of vision has got a future.
And what would your prayer and vision be for Highbury today?
Be thou my vision, Lord.
Wonderful, wonderful. That says it all, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You can find out more about Highbury's vision for now and the future at www.highburychurch.co.uk.